Greetings sailors and welcome to a viewer warships replay from Chaser 617 over on the NA server. He's in the Kagero, which is one of the tier 8 Japanese destroyers, the non-gunboaty one, and although this used to be a very nice ship at tier 9, it's still pretty decent at tier 8. And especially with this matchmaking, when he's top tier and there's some lower tiers to pick on, it's, in theory, relatively comfortable, but only relatively because there are carriers in play. So he is going to have that to worry about. However, this isn't going to necessarily be a sensible game, I'll put it that way. This is a game with antics, with a capital A, as you shall soon see. And I can't really commend Chaser for sensible play here, but I can certainly say that I was very entertained watching this replay, and I imagine they had rather a lot of fun playing this game as well. So I can hardly say that this one is going to be instructive, shall we say, as to how to play your Japanese destroyers, but hopefully you too will find it quite entertaining. So he's moved into the sea cap. It's blocked by one of the enemy destroyers, clearly. Not had any troubles from carriers yet, and well, we see 3 torps going past, which could be one of the tier 6 destroyers, which I think is what he surmises based on what he says in the chat in a second. So he's thinking, okay, yeah, 3 tubes, either Fubuki or Hatsu. So he's thinking, okay, it's probably something I can outgun, which, given that all the enemy destroyers are, like, if there was an Akizuki on the enemy team, but no, their top tier destroyer is also another Kagero. So he's figuring it's one of the tier 6s, and he can probably bully that. And as the carrier's not really bothering him, maybe he can be a little more aggressive. Although he is just kind of spotting for now, waiting to see if this enemy destroyer gets bored. This can be one of the more frustrating parts in a domination game. Sometimes, as much as I really don't like standard games, sometimes you at least have, as a destroyer, more freedom of action because you're not tied to those cap points. But quite often, standard games just end up being a furball of some variety or other. So this enemy destroyer, though, they've done something a bit, I don't know, they've smoked up. I don't know if there was our carrier's planes going overhead and I just didn't notice them, but either way, they've smoked up. That tells Chaser exactly where they are, and so he's cautiously approaching. They're clearly behind the island, so he can at least get up sight unseen. I mean, even if they weren't smoked, he could possibly get away with this. Although that Numex is getting a little close, but still not close enough to spot him. We've also got 2 friendly battleships, 2 tier 6 battleships pushing up this flank. We know there's a destroyer here. There's smoke. There's gunfire coming from the smoke. Do you think that Normandy is paying attention to any of that? No, they've just hit their W key and are going forwards full pelt. I think they might have already eaten a torpedo, maybe? I don't know. They've lost a lot of health. Now, as that smoke clears, it turns out it is, in fact, the enemy Kagero. And the reason we only saw 3 torpedoes go past earlier is because one of them caught on the island. And that means that their guns are at least as good as his. Although, of course, there's captain skills and things to take into account as well. If they've got, say, BFT, they might have the slight rate of fire edge. I mean, you can, in theory, build your non-gunboat Japanese destroyers to get a bit more out of the guns, because the Japanese 127 mils are pretty meaty. It's just they've got a relatively low rate of fire and tend to have a not very good turret traverse. But you compare the ballistics to, say, the much faster firing US guns, and yeah, they're not bad. People often are taken by surprise by these guns. Now, at this point, I mean, we've got Kanizer now on the flank there. The new mechs is looking like they're thinking of pushing. At this point, the antics begin because for some reason, Chaser decides to take the very aggressive course of action, pushing against this enemy Kagero. Is going slowly, speeds up, so that is able to throw off the Kagero's torps. The Kagero's going to eat his torps. But there's also now still the Gneisenau and the New Mexico to deal with. So he punts out his own smoke, which is fine. He's actually kind of gotten away with this. I mean, it was a risky move, but enemy top tier destroyer out of the way. He managed to get the cap. Doesn't necessarily have to worry about this Gneisenau. The Gneisenau was aiming at him, but he's more intent on the Bayern and the Ashigara there, the Miyoko clone. But there's still a New Mexico to his north, and I think he slightly miscalculates how much turning radius he's going to need here, and maybe was expecting the New Mexico to have backed off, but no, they're just slowly ploughing forwards, and that happens. But fortunately they at least had AP loaded, so although it was 3k hit points, it wasn't that bad. If it had been HE, could have been a lot worse. Anyway, the Gneisenau's gone down, took the Bayern with them, and I don't think the New Mexico is going to avoid these torps. Maybe they were thinking he didn't have torps available, but as it was, he did. Landed all four and got himself a devastating strike. So, okay, antics. But he's still got about a third of his health left, right? Well, he's not done yet. Rather than bailing out the cap south, which would have been a bit more sensible, instead he turns his sights on this Tirpitz, getting himself briefly spotted, but the Tirpitz is firing across the way, so we'll see if the Tirpitz has paid any attention to the fact that a destroyer popped up really quite close and maybe tries to go forward a bit. But rather than slowing his speed or anything like that, Chaser then follows through around this side of the island, and oh, he's now very close to this Warspite, and the Warspite is going to turn out to have high explosive loaded, and Chaser doesn't have any torpedoes ready just yet, and in fact actually gets one of his launchers reset. So the Tirpitz, turns out, wasn't paying attention at all. That's another kill. Fortunately those HE shells didn't hurt too much, but yeah, this is not a good situation, Chaser, it really isn't. And Warspite's secondaries are maybe not on a par with the German secondaries, but for a Tier 6 battleship, they're still pretty decent. So they're pinging away all the while, and this is taking long enough that the Warspite gets off another hit. Fortunately, it's the same torpedo launcher, it's not the one that's just reloaded. So he's going to maybe get a chance to put his torps out, and does so just as a secondary gun knocks that torpedo launcher out too. But this Warspite at least is paying a bit more attention, because they are not going to die to these torpedoes. Might be a slight spoiler alert there. Hell, they're not going to die to torpedoes at all. It's not to say there might not be some torpedo hits, however. This smoke, by the way, I don't know if this was an attempt at a decoy, if he just fat-fingered the keyboard, as I sometimes do, if he maybe had plans to use the smoke to fire through, hoping that the Warspite would be spotted by an ally. It's not entirely clear to me, but as it is, he doesn't end up using this smoke at all, so whatever idea was behind that did not pan out at all. And at this stage, I mean, he's really not got a lot of hit points. At least he has a nice bonus from Adrenaline Rush if he has that right. So the situation overall is not looking great. I mean, we've had all the antics going on here, and while that's happened, with Chaser's 3 kills, the rest of his team have also managed to get some kills. But in terms of points, it's very one-sided. I mean, they've now capped this cap that Chaser got. The Massachusetts has been trying to cap B, but it's not a stealthy ship, so they've been getting reset. They might be just about to grab it, though. And the rest of his allies are all clumped to the south. That means the enemy team is now split between these two Tier 6s and everyone else over on the other flank. And they've actually lost their carrier at this point as well. So despite his low health, Chaser really doesn't have to worry about that. So he comes around the edge of the island, gets a torp hit 1 into that war spite, but it's a Japanese torp, so it still hurts. Close enough now, he's close enough now to get spotted, but the war spite is rather struggling. I think they're flooding as well as burning here, so rather cheekily, Chaser uses his guns, not that anything else could really have fired at him at that point, and now he's free to get the cap, and that just leaves this Nürnberg on this flank, who is not in a good position themselves. They're in a squashy cruiser, and instead of trying to fall back, maybe get north, they're not trying to stealth at all. They're actually coming in towards the cap and firing all the while, which is not a good survival strategy when you're in a tier 6 cruiser in a tier 8 game. Given that this Nürnberg, however squashy it might be, could still easily end him with only 2.2k health left, Chaser this time decides to be sensible this time and withholds fire, trusting to his allies to maybe do the job here. And he could even drop some torpedoes very, very shortly, but it doesn't quite get the angle. And although he has the option of dropping a smoke here and maybe opening fire, perhaps he's wary of the Nürnberg's hydro, because there's a very good chance they will have the hydro, so decides not to do that. Now in going forward here, he does get himself spotted, but it's not really much of a window for the Nürnberg to have done anything. I think he really, like, if he'd been sensible, he would have waited for the Nürnberg to die before coming forwards again like that. But yeah, the Massachusetts easily took care of the Nürnberg, and I think that was what the Nürnberg was focusing on anyway. Maybe they were, I mean, there was torps out there, so maybe they were trying to get in close to the Massachusetts to drop torps, but that's very unlikely to work against a tier 8 battleship. So the enemy team lost one of their remaining destroyers in B as well, so they're down to only 3 ships, but they do still have one of their other tier 6 destroyers left, who's gotten 3 kills. They've obviously done something, but yeah, in terms of the ships and the map control, this is now definitely swung back in their favour, although the enemy team does still have a pretty hefty lead in points. But with the only 3 ships they have left and the state of those ships, I don't think they're going to bring this one out to be a win somehow. I think this is pretty much one for Chaser's team. 115k damage after all those antics, by the way. He's not quite done yet, but yeah, there's not that much else you could do. There's the Algerie has a decent amount of health, and there is still that Fubuki, but he's not really got the hit points now to do anything more silly. Although having said that, it might not stop him, given what we've seen him doing so far. So torps out towards the Algerie, but he's also got his remaining allied battleship and the other ships here gunning for them as well, so he's probably not going to get them, but well, there's the Fubuki. He might kill them, and if he does, it's a Kraken, so I think that's why he's taking the risk at this point, even though this is highly risky. But it's only the Fubuki that's firing back at him, not the Algerie, although the Algerie's just taken an interest. So there goes that destroyer for the Kraken. The Algerie's definitely looking at him, and as a nice bonus he gets a torp into the Algerie, but at this stage, even if the Algerie does get him, it's fine. They've won. They're not going to lose this. Unfortunately, he's actually able to get unspotted as the Algerie goes into that smoke cloud, so he even gets to live, and there we go, the Algerie then dies to one of the other torpedoes heading in that direction. So that was a very silly game indeed, not at all sensible. 132k damage, Confederate Dev Strike and the Kraken, 2600 base XP, and I absolutely would not recommend this as a style of playing, but as I said at the start, a very entertaining game nonetheless. And actually the tier 6s did okay all round in that. There was the Fuso there quite high up on the team list, and it was the New Mexico that was the top of the enemy's team list. So their tier 8s were maybe not doing quite so well. I mean, certainly their Tirpitz could have done a bit better. Pulling into a cap circle like that where you know there's a destroyer and then ignoring said destroyer when they get spotted at close range to you. Yeah, I think they tunnel visioned a bit too hard on whatever else it was they were shooting at that point. So hopefully you have enjoyed this exceptionally silly bit of Japanese destroyer gameplay, and if you have, you can do all the usual things down underneath the video, and of course, as always, stay tuned for more.